The Prince of Egypt. It's a movie that you either hold a lot of nostalgia for or a movie that you've never heard of in your life. The movie has everything: an ambitious cast, Hans Zimmer composing the music, and that crisp, splendor animation that DreamWorks always gives us. Well, most of the time they do. The movie opens in an epic and spine-tingling fashion. The smoky visuals and murky colour schemes set the picture as the foreboding music takes us to a world over 3,000 years ago, in which Egypt ruled the Western world at the height of the New Kingdom period. Except we do not see the Egyptians as these great pioneers who flourished in culture and social development. We see them as the villains. The Hebrews pray to be delivered by God and into a world where they are free. The lyrics are extremely brutal and not something that you would see written in an animated movie today, or even in '98. You really feel the long suffering of pain in these words and the mundane routine that it's become when they utter the chores in the opening verse. It's certainly the most memorable song in the film and arguably one of the best I've heard in any musical. They show the inhumane nature of slavery with appropriate images that don't drive you to a point where it becomes graphic, but enough to make you understand the cruelty behind these actions. The shot of a struggling elderly man being helped by a younger Hebrew before being pushed away by an Egyptian connects you to the torment that has been enforced on one race of people. The animation just has this striking and ambitious scope that captures the epic religious biblicals and the sword and sandals from the 50s and 60s. We see the pharaohs raid the homes of Hebrews to intentionally kill newborn Hebrew boys to reduce the increase of possible rebellion. Now this is not really implied in any way unless you're familiar with the Ten Commandments story from the Book of Exodus. It's a very dark theme to explore in an animated movie, and to be honest, I'm trying to think of a way in which this can be handled without being controversial, and it's really difficult. His mother hides Moses in a basket and takes him to the Nile, hoping he can live a life free from this world of violence and cruelty. Now this particular scene of the basket going through these dangerous obstacles like the crocodiles and hippos were over the top. And it got even more far-fetched when the ship was about to collide and crash the basket. I mean, of course, a crocodile's typical prey would be a basket out in its natural habitat. It contains all the necessary nutrients to make you turn into a strong croc. But wait, don't let the hippos get to it, as baskets are also their diets too. So they overdid it with the dramatic effects, but the basket survives that strange journey of peril and makes its way into the pharaoh's palace, where the queen adopts him as her own. And this is all witnessed by Moses' sister. How did she get that close into the palace? For such a great kingdom of great wealth, the pharaohs obviously didn't fund enough towards security.
Come, Ramesses. We will show Pharaoh your new baby brother.
Does anyone find it strange that the pharaohs' accents are English while the Hebrews are American? Is this because the pharaohs are technically the bad guys in this movie? Why are English accents seen as the archetype voice for a villain? This seems like I'm just salty because I'm English, but it's not, you gotta believe me. This has happened in The Lion King, Aladdin, and 101 Dalmatians. What makes the English accent such an appealing bad guy voice? I mean, it's become so overused now it just comes off as corny. What did the English do to deserve this punishment? What have they ever done wrong? I'm serious, apart from the last 400 years. What have we really done wrong? Many years later, Moses is now a young man who has developed a close relationship with his adopted brother and heir to the throne of Egypt, Ramesses. The two are nothing short of troublemakers, causing havoc and mayhem in the wealthy streets of ancient Egypt. They are typical daredevil bros who push each other to reckless results.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
Is it just me, or do their bodies look like sad faces? We are introduced to the pharaoh Seti, a stern and commanding father who is harsh on Ramesses, so he can become a strong pharaoh when he succeeds the throne. This father-son relationship of seeking approval was a great theme to use, because it shows that Ramesses believes that his father hates him, when really he's showing him something that most fathers show to their sons even today: tough love. Maybe he isn't such a bad father after all. Apart from the fact that he ordered the deaths of all Hebrew infants and shows no mercy to his slaves in order to have temples of riches to establish the brutal legacy of the pharaohs. Moses is shown to be the more insubordinate of the two, which tells you that he doesn't really fit in this world living as a prince, so he rebels and does things his way even if they are harmless. Ramesses is named Prince Regent, which is the earliest sign that causes a rift of conflict between the brothers' relationship. The high priests offer Ramesses a woman to him through a strange presentation of magic. The priests are played by Martin Short and Steve Martin, and I guess they're supposed to be the comic relief in this movie. Kind of like a jest, except they're straight up evil. The woman's name is Zipporah from Midian, which is supposedly located in modern Saudi Arabia. She fails to appease and fights back. The daredevil bro inside Moses publicly embarrasses Zipporah by causing her to fall into a pond. You know you've hit a new low when your own mother gives you the "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed" face. He feels a great deal of guilt and hopes to reconcile with Zipporah, but catches her escaping. And just when she is about to be caught again, he intervenes and helps her escape. En route, Moses runs into his own group of siblings, except that he doesn't recognize them, which makes complete sense, and I'm more puzzled as to why Miriam, his biological sister, expected him to know everything about his true heritage.
They never told you?
Told him what exactly? The pharaohs didn't know where the baby came from. He could have come from an Egyptian family to their knowledge, but you were there at the palace to correct them. Hey, just wondering that the baby you're carrying is an Israelite. You know, the race that the pharaoh himself ordered to kill. So if you didn't know he was Hebrew, then he wouldn't have lived on in the first place. Unless the mother did know he was Hebrew and did not reveal his true bloodline to the pharaoh or anyone else, which would actually be a believable motive. But there's one thing. None of what I just described is shown in the movie. Oh wait, here comes the mother now. Maybe she will clear everything up to reveal why she kept him.
Why did you choose me?
We didn't, Moses. The gods did.
Okay, that's a dead end. So really this adaptation of the Ten Commandments failed to explain the reasoning about Moses' background. And the reason why they failed is because they flashed forward to Moses from an infant to a young adult. There was enough space to fill a chapter on Moses as a child growing up in the palace. Here we would have gotten a better understanding of how he is treated, how the relationship with Ramesses develops, and how Pharaoh Seti educated him on the Egyptian culture. Having this chapter would have enriched the characters with far more depth, making the audience slightly latched into the choices Moses makes in his later life. Anyway, back to Moses confronting his real siblings. He is offended to be called a Hebrew and does not believe a single word Miriam says, until she sings the lullaby that his mother sang to him on the day that he was adopted by the pharaoh. And you may think, how is it possible for an infant to remember a song, or anything at all, without any justification to explain this trigger memory? Well, there's a few seconds of Moses whistling the song, but that's all you get. Like I said, there wasn't enough time to let his life as a prince develop. This is an epic tale, and changing from a man of excessive privilege and wealth to one of humility and generosity to people he had been taught to see as beneath human is something that's going to take more than just a whistle of a song to change his heart. Ah yes, I suddenly have an urge to rebel against the family I've known my whole life and showed me nothing but love. And then they try to use a poor plot device to alter Moses' view on the Egyptians and the Hebrews. He has a nightmare of the pharaoh's genocide towards his people, and then sees the murals of this genocide and enslavement. I mean, stylistically this is a really creative sequence, but it doesn't really make much sense to me, because Moses has been exposed to witnessing slaves being whipped and beaten many times since he's always riding carriages with Ramesses around the construction of the temples. Why would he suddenly feel different about it simply because he just discovered that he descends from that particular group of people? They never show Moses scolding the Hebrews, but he doesn't really see them as something of any worth either, which is no different to how any other Egyptian citizen would view them. I just felt that this particular plot point is a huge change in one character's arc and requires far more time to evolve, which will make his choice to help the Hebrews a more genuine one. I get that this is an animated movie for kids and you can't have a 3-hour epic tale, it would just put them to sleep. But then to follow that question would be, why would you make a biblical story aimed at children in the first place and expect them to not be bored? Moses now looks at the slaves with compassion and feels their pain. His ideals have changed now, though rather suddenly, but it's all hard to believe about having a sudden change of heart if you see something from a different perspective. You are constantly surrounded by insects and bugs your whole life. They basically live in your home, and if you see one you instantly kill it. And there are other times you tread on its home in the garden, or you may step on a bug without noticing. Then one day you may see a documentary on bugs and be fascinated by them. You go back into your garden and watch how these bugs live their life. You look at the ants and suddenly feel guilty about the times you've trapped them in a jar or set fire on them. In some sick, twisted way, the bug analogy can be applied to the way Moses sees the Israelites. They are no longer slaves to him but Hebrews. Just as the insects are no longer bugs but ants that roam the same land as you with equal freedom. Moses subsequently saves a slave by accidentally pushing the guard to his death. Confused and conflicted by everything he's known in his life, he flees Egypt. Ramesses urges him to stay, and this is really the last moment that the two see each other as genuine brothers. It's a scene that could have been emphasized more dramatically to show the loss of two people so close to one another and are about to go off into opposing interests. Moses finds himself in the land of Midian across the Red Sea, where he runs into Zipporah and her sisters after defending them from robbers.
Ladies, you've cleaned every inch of me. Whoa, I was wrong.
This is a kid's movie, right? He meets Zipporah's father, the high priest of Midian, who is the most typical looking Middle Eastern dad you could think of. Moses begins to settle in Midian through the power of song and becomes a shepherd. He is content with his new life and naturally falls in love and marries Zipporah. Again, if this movie had more time to fill, the love between Moses and Zipporah could have been evolved in a more authentic way. But I guess that's not really the main theme of this story. So God calls upon Moses to return to Egypt and free the Hebrews. Moses is reluctant as he feels he is the wrong man to take this mission, but God ensures him he will be by his side and tell him what to say when he confronts the Pharaoh. He greets Ramesses, now Pharaoh of Egypt, and their reunion is one met with open joy, though only for a short while before Moses reveals his intentions. He shows them the power of his God and his staff transforms into a snake. I don't really know why. I'm not sure what a snake has to do with any of this. In retaliation, Martin Short and Steve Martin performed their own transformation and a very catchy song that honestly made me side with the Egyptians. Ramesses realizes Moses has changed completely and there's a look of disappointment in his eyes. I feel that if they showed the story from Ramesses' perspective, which seems like the wrong message, but it would also open more eyes to understand how he has been brought up and essentially brainwashed by his father. He subsequently doubles the workload of the Hebrews. That's some strong mud to take out of a fully grown man.
I'm just trying to do as God told me. God?
When did God start caring about any of us? Life, finds a way.
This was the real question of the story, an angle that should have been explored more. The Hebrews had suffered enslavement for centuries, and it took until now for God to realize their distress. Moses cast the 10 plagues of Egypt. He turns the water into blood, but Ramesses remains unfazed as the high priests also conjure the same spell. He casts the next 8 plagues, including frogs, lice, and thunderstorms of hail and fire. In the book of Exodus, Ramesses actually begs Moses to rid the 4th plague in exchange for the Hebrews' freedom. However, when the plague ends, he changes his mind. They did not show it in this movie, and I think they should have because it would have depicted Ramesses as a man of stubbornness and pride without Moses actually having to say it out loud so the audience can go, "Oh, I didn't realize the Pharaoh was a man plagued by honor and legacy until Moses pointed it out for me. Now I know what kind of man Ramesses really is." Moses casts the 10th and final plague, and this is a pretty dark one to show in a kids movie, but I don't think DreamWorks would have given this the green light if it was for an original animated movie. The fact that it is based on a biblical story is probably the best excuse to present themes of death and curses. The final plague is the death of all firstborn sons upon midnight. A cruel part of the story that I don't think is right, but who am I to question the reasoning of a 3,000-year-old story from the Old Testament? Ramesses' son is killed as a result of the plague. Grief-stricken, he allows Moses and the Hebrews to leave. You can tell so badly he just wants to demand his people's freedom rather than offering his condolences, since he's the one who pretty much killed him. Moses reaches for Ramesses' shoulder, but he does not reciprocate. This relationship was something that was barely scratched upon throughout the movie, and it could have been a really heartbreaking scene. And so Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt into the Red Sea. Just as they are about to cross, Ramesses and the Egyptians show up.
Randy Orton slithering. Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
But God strikes down a pillar of fire to prevent the Egyptians from approaching them. Moses uses his staff to part the Red Sea. This whole sequence felt quite rushed to me. This is such an epic moment and everything just sort of happened in a click of a finger. They could have really built up some tension for the parting of the sea. It could have been for a real nerve-wracking spectacle, and the animators have proven many times in this movie that they are capable of achieving such a feat. I think Ralph Fiennes might have overdone it with the voice acting. Ramesses' descent into madness was expected but was very premature. The last we saw of him, he was mourning his son, and the next he's gone mad. There should have been a scene to show this drastic transformation. I mean, it makes sense, don't get me wrong. It just seems sudden and rushed. The whole conclusion felt like that, to be honest. This is a really powerful scene, and I personally couldn't help sympathise for Ramesses, and the superimposed edit of Moses hearing his brother's cries, makes it all the more tragic. So overall, The Prince of Egypt was a movie I had mixed feelings about. You have a great platform to tell a well-known story, and you can't really add all of this emotion into just 90 minutes. The soundtrack was one of the most memorable in any animated musical. In fact, and unsurprisingly, it won the Oscar for Best Original Song. I'm assuming it was for Deliverers. What other song was as good as... What is wrong with the Academy? That song was played at the end credits and it's like the worst track to listen to. It doesn't even suit the story. It's the most typical 90s song you could think of. I felt that the theme of brothers and sibling rivalry was something that should have been explored with more depth because it was essentially a major part of the conflict. But it's a movie that is still watchable. The animation is breathtaking and the voice acting is pretty solid for the most part. But there's something missing from this movie that I don't get when watching The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast. These movies have a somewhat epic feel to them, but the story is a lot more contained. The Prince of Egypt has a lot of themes and subplots, and the producers failed to deliver this. Maybe they could have split the story into 2 parts, but I don't think DreamWorks have the brain capacity to be ambitious like that. And in the end, it's a movie that's turned out kind of somewhere in the middle.